Martha Ellis had lived long enough to know the quiet ache of empty evenings. At 68, she had made peace, or so she told herself, with the idea that romance was a closed chapter of her life. Widowed for nearly 2 decades, she had poured her energy into teaching English literature at the local high school until retirement, then into raising her children, and later helping with her grandchildren. Love, she reasoned, was for the young and impulsive, for the ones who still carried the fire of possibility in their bones. Not for her. Not anymore. Her days had a rhythm, a kind of soft predictability. Morning tea with honey, the rustle of the newspaper, an hour tending the rose bushes that grew along the fence. Afternoons often found her reading, sewing, or baking, small acts of creation that brought comfort but little thrill. Friends sometimes teased her about being married to her garden, and though she laughed, there was a sliver of truth to it. Plants didn't leave, plants didn't grow tired of you, and in a way, their dependable cycles mirrored the predictable course of her own days. On Sundays, her daughter would bring the grandchildren over, filling the house with noise and warmth. Those visits gave Martha joy, yet also sharpened a certain loneliness. She would smile as she watched her family chatter around the table, but at night, when the last car drove away and silence settled again, she would feel the hollow space beside her in bed. Still, she brushed the thought away. Better to be grateful for what she had than to mourn what she no longer expected. It wasn't as though she hadn't tried once upon a time. After her husband Frank died suddenly of a heart attack at 48, she had been approached, tentatively, by other men. A widower from church invited her for coffee. A kind neighbor suggested dinner. But every time she tried, the conversations fell flat, as though her heart were encased in glass. She would smile politely, make excuses, and retreat back to her garden. Over time, people stopped asking and she was relieved. It was easier to say she was too busy or too set in her ways than to admit she was afraid. Afraid of being hurt again. Afraid of losing again. Afraid, most of all, that she was too old for anyone to look at her the way Frank once had. Martha carried those doubts quietly, tucked beneath her sweaters and sensible shoes. To the outside world, she was a dignified, capable woman with silver, hair always neatly pinned, her glasses perched low on her nose, her posture still straight despite the creeping stiffness in her joints. Inside, she sometimes felt like a faded photograph, still recognizable, but not vibrant, not the person she used to be. Her friends would sometimes whisper about late-life romances they'd heard of, widows who had remarried, couples who found each other through travel clubs or church groups. But Martha would shake her head and say with conviction, "That's not for me. I'm too old for all that." And she believed it. Believed it so fully that she never questioned the finality of her words. Love had been something she had once known deeply, something that had shaped her as a wife, a mother, a woman. But now, she thought, it was simply part of her past. Like the dresses she no longer wore, or the records she no longer played. Beautiful once, but outgrown. And so, Martha lived as though love belonged to another world. She filled her days with duties and hobbies, her nights with books and tea. She walked through the seasons in quiet resignation, convincing herself that she was content, yet somewhere beneath her careful routines, beneath her certainty that she was too old for love, a faint ember of longing still glowed, unseen, unacknowledged, waiting for something, or someone. She did not yet. Imagine, it was her sister Evelyn's idea. "You need air, Martha." "Different air," Evelyn had said one chilly March morning, her voice bright as she waved a glossy travel brochure over the breakfast table. The pamphlet showed sunlit mesas, red cliffs rising like ancient cathedrals, and vast skies painted with the burnished colors of dusk. "Arizona," Evelyn declared. "We'll take a little trip, just the two of us." "You've been cooped up in that house too long," Martha tried to protest. She always did when Evelyn suggested adventures. Too far, too expensive, too much trouble, she began. But Evelyn, 3 years younger and infinitely more spirited, brushed her excuses aside like crumbs. You're retired. I'm retired. If not now, when? And so, reluctantly, Martha packed her suitcase. She filled it with sensible clothing, cotton blouses, a wide-brimmed hat, sturdy shoes, though she slipped in one soft scarf, crimson with tiny embroidered roses. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps a part of her longed to see how it looked against the desert sun. The flight itself was uneventful, though Martha felt the usual unease when suspended above the clouds. Evelyn chattered the whole way, telling stories of old friends, neighborhood gossip, even plans for what they might do once they arrived. Martha smiled, nodded, and stared out the oval window. Below stretched the quilt of the land, green fading to tan, then to the deep ochres and russet browns of the southwest. When the plane landed and the heavy doors opened to the Arizona heat, Martha felt the warmth like a shock. It was not the mild, humid warmth of her Midwestern town, but a dry, unyielding sun that pressed against the skin. The air itself seemed thinner, sharper, carrying a faint tang of sage and dust. She inhaled, surprised at how alive it made her feel. Their lodge sat near the edge of a canyon. From the balcony of her room, Martha could see a landscape unlike anything she had ever known. Red stone spires rising like the bones of the earth, shadows shifting as clouds drifted overhead, and beyond, the sky so wide it seemed to stretch into forever. At night, the stars spilled across the heavens in a brilliance she hadn't seen since childhood. She stood there long after Evelyn had gone to bed, the cool air brushing her face, feeling both small and strangely unburdened beneath that endless dome. During the days they explored, Evelyn led them on short hikes, her energy tireless, her laughter echoing along the canyon trails. Martha walked more slowly, careful of her knees, but she found herself enchanted by the desert's quiet mysteries. She marveled at prickly pear, cacti in bloom, their flowers fierce bursts of color against thorny green. She traced the lines of petroglyphs carved into stone centuries ago. She listened to the silence, a silence so deep it seemed to hold stories within it. The desert did something to her, something she could not name. It was not merely beautiful. It was vast, ageless, indifferent to human clocks and calendars. Standing at the rim of a cliff, she felt time loosen its grip. The years she had carried like a burden, her age, her losses, her sense of being too late for anything new, suddenly seemed smaller, like grains of sand slipping through her fingers. Evelyn noticed her quietness. "What's going through that head of yours?" she asked one evening as they sat on the lodge's veranda, sipping iced tea. Martha smiled faintly. "Just thinking how young this place makes me feel. Or maybe not young, just unmeasured." Her sister gave her a knowing look, but said nothing. It was only a trip, a week carved out of habit and routine. Yet already Martha sensed that the desert was undoing her in gentle ways. It peeled back the layers she had built around herself. The routines, the excuses, the resignation. Something in those wide skies whispered that her story was not yet finished. And though she did not yet know it, the land itself seemed to be preparing her. Preparing her for the moment she would step off the familiar trail and encounter a man who had been waiting for her far longer than she could imagine. On their 4th day in Arizona, Evelyn insisted they join a guided canyon walk. "It'll be fun," she said brightly, lacing up her hiking shoes. "The guide is supposed to tell stories about the old tribes who lived here. You love history." Martha hesitated, but agreed. The morning sun was soft, the air cool enough to make the trek inviting. A small group gathered near the trailhead, tourists with cameras, couples in wide-brimmed hats, a handful of children tugging on their parents' hands. Their guide was a lean man in his 40s with weathered skin and an easy smile. His voice carried the cadence of someone who loved the land, And as they walked, he spoke of rivers that once cut deep canyons, of pueblos built and abandoned, of people whose blood and memory still lived in the stones. It was near the edge of a high mesa that he lowered his voice, letting it fall into the rhythm of story. "There is a tale," he said, "that our people still tell, of a man who walks the desert, tall as the saguaros, silent as the wind. Some call him the Watcher of the Mesa." The group chuckled nervously. A few children looked wide-eyed at the cliffs above. Martha, too, felt a shiver she couldn't explain. The guide continued. "They say he is Apache, one of the last of a proud line, carrying traditions most have forgotten. He lives apart, not because he must, but because it is his calling. He guards the land, honors it, listens to it. Few have seen him, but those who have say he is different. A giant among men, strong but gentle." "What's he watching for?" Evelyn asked, ever curious. The guide smiled faintly. "For what the land tells him. For changes. For people who forget how to walk with respect. Some say he waits for someone. A companion, perhaps, though no one knows for sure. Maybe it is only a story told to children so they remember to tread lightly." The group laughed, the tension broken, but Martha did not laugh. She gazed at the mesas in the distance, their edges glowing in the late morning sun, and felt something stir inside her. The words "waiting for someone" echoed in her mind, though she quickly brushed them aside. Later, as they rested near a cluster of red boulders, an older woman in the group leaned toward Martha. "You know," she said softly, as though sharing a secret, "my grandmother swore she saw him once when she was a girl, said he was the tallest man she'd ever seen. Black hair down his back, eyes that looked right through you. She said he helped her find her way when she was lost, then disappeared into the rocks." Martha smiled politely, unsure what to say. She had lived long enough to hear plenty of stories dressed as truth. Yet something about the woman's tone, earnest, reverent, made her hesitate before dismissing it. That evening, back at the lodge, Evelyn teased her. "You were quiet all day. Still thinking about that Watcher fellow? What would you even do if you stumbled into him?" Martha rolled her eyes, though a blush warmed her cheeks. "Don't be ridiculous. He's just a legend." But when she lay down that night, the desert breeze whispering through the window, she found herself picturing him anyway. Not clearly, only impressions. A towering figure against the horizon, long hair dark as raven feathers, a presence that was both fierce and kind. She scolded herself for indulging such thoughts. Yet they lingered, like the aftertaste of strong tea, impossible to ignore. Perhaps it was only the desert working its strange magic. The vastness, the silence, the stories. Or perhaps, she thought fleetingly before sleep claimed her, the land really did keep secrets, and legends sometimes. Stepped out of the shadows when least expected. 2 days after hearing the story of the Watcher, Martha rose before dawn. The lodge was quiet, the hallways hushed. Evelyn still slept, her soft snore drifting through the cracked door of their shared suite. Martha dressed quietly, slipped on her sturdy shoes, and wrapped that crimson scarf around her shoulders. Something had drawn her outside, perhaps the restless tug of the desert itself. The sky was still dark when she set out, but already the horizon had begun to blush with pale streaks of gold. She followed a narrow path from the lodge, winding between low sagebrush and clusters of prickly pear. The air was cool, almost sweet, carrying the faint scent of creosote. Each step seemed to peel back a layer of the weariness she had carried for years. She was not far from the canyon rim when her foot caught on a hidden stone. Pain flared sharp in her ankle, and she stumbled, gasping. She sat down hard on the dusty trail, her breath coming fast, her scarf slipping from her shoulders. When she tried to stand, Her ankle protested fiercely, refusing to bear her weight. Panic prickled. She glanced behind her. The lodge was out of sight. The silence felt heavier now, pressing in, vast and indifferent. "Foolish," she muttered aloud. "What were you thinking, coming out here alone?" And then, from the wavering heat of the horizon, a figure emerged. At first she thought it was a trick of the light, the way shadows stretched strangely across the desert at dawn. But the shape grew clearer, taller, broader, until she realized it was a man walking toward her. Her heart stuttered. He was enormous, towering well above any man she had ever seen, his shoulders as broad as the cliffs themselves. His long black hair flowed behind him, streaked faintly with silver, catching the first blush of sunlight. Instinct told her she should be afraid. Yet when he drew near, she felt something entirely different, a stillness, a calm as steady as the desert wind. "Are you hurt?" His voice was deep, resonant, carrying both strength and gentleness. "Yes," she admitted, flustered. "My ankle." "I shouldn't have come out alone." Without hesitation, he crouched beside her, moving with surprising grace for a man of his size. His hands, large and strong, brushed the dust from her skirt before gently testing her ankle. She winced, but did not pull away. His touch was careful, respectful. "It's not broken," he said after a moment, "but you won't walk far on it." She nodded, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to trouble anyone." His dark eyes met hers, and for an instant, she felt as though the desert itself were looking at her. Deep, endless, unyielding yet filled with quiet life. "You are no trouble," he said simply. Then, without asking, he slipped one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back. In one effortless motion, he lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. Martha gasped, instinctively clutching at his shoulder. She had not been carried like that since her youth, and certainly never by a man so formidable. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks, her heart thundering with a rhythm she had nearly forgotten. He began walking, steady and sure-footed, the desert opening before them. "The lodge is near," he said. For a time, Martha was too stunned to speak. She studied him instead. The strong line of his jaw, the streaks of silver in his hair, the calm way he moved, as though the land itself bent to his pace. She thought of the guide's story, of the whispered legend of the Watcher of the Mesa. A chill ran through her despite the warmth of the rising sun. Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable, but not unkind. "My name is Dakota." The name hung in the air, heavy with meaning she could not yet grasp. And as he carried her back toward safety, Martha could not shake the feeling that she had just stepped, quite literally, into the heart of a legend. Back at the lodge, Dakota set Martha down gently on the wooden bench near the entrance, as if she were made of something precious. The early morning light bathed the scene in soft gold, and for a moment Martha sat there breathless, clutching her scarf, unsure if she had dreamed the whole thing. "Stay off that ankle today," Dakota said, his voice low but firm. "It will heal faster if you rest." Martha found herself nodding like a schoolgirl, though some part of her bristled at the tone. "I'm nearly 70 years old, not a child," she thought. Yet when she looked up at him, the gentle concern in his eyes melted her retort. Evelyn came bustling out the front doors then, her hair disheveled from sleep, worry etched across her face. "Martha! Where on earth, oh my goodness, who is this?" She looked up, way up, at Dakota, her mouth falling open. Martha stammered an explanation, but Dakota simply inclined his head in greeting. "I found your sister on the trail," he said evenly. "She is safe." Evelyn blinked at his towering figure, her usual chatter stilled for once. "Well, thank you, sir, truly." Dakota gave a slight nod, then turned back to Martha. "I will come back later, to see how you are." Before she could respond, He stepped away, his long stride carrying him toward the mesa. Within moments, he was swallowed by the landscape, as if he belonged more to the desert than to the world of people. For the rest of the day, Martha could think of little else. She kept replaying the moment he had lifted her, the effortless strength in his arms, the strange calm she had felt in his presence. He was not like any man she had ever met, not merely because of his size, but because of the way he carried himself, as though rooted in the earth yet moving with the wind. When evening came and the shadows stretched long across the canyon, he returned. No announcement, no sound of approach. He was simply there, standing near the veranda as the last of the tourists drifted inside. "You came back," Martha said softly, setting aside her book. "I said I would." His gaze flicked to her ankle, now propped on a cushion. "How is the pain?" "Less," she admitted. "Thanks to your help." He gave a small nod of approval and lowered himself onto the bench beside her. The wood creaked under his weight. Sitting there, he seemed even larger, his broad shoulders filling the space, his presence making the world feel smaller around him. Martha studied him in the fading light. His hair was thick, streaked with silver, like threads of moonlight. His face bore the marks of years, lines carved by sun and wind, but they only added to the impression of strength, of endurance. "You live here?" she asked, her curiosity outweighing her reserve. "Yes," he said simply. "The land is my home." "Alone?" He turned his head toward her, his eyes dark and steady. "Alone." The word carried no bitterness, only fact. Yet something in his tone stirred Martha's heart. She had lived alone for so many years, and though she rarely admitted it, loneliness had become a quiet ache she could not shake. Hearing it spoken in his voice, she felt a strange kinship. "Most people need company," she said after a pause. Dakota looked out toward the horizon, where the sky burned with the last embers of sunset. "The land is company, the wind, the stars, but sometimes—" He hesitated, then glanced back at her. "Sometimes it is not enough." The silence between them deepened, heavy, but not uncomfortable. Martha's pulse quickened. She did not know what to say. All she knew was that she did not want him to leave. At last, he stood. "Rest," he said again, his voice softer this time. "I will walk with you tomorrow, if you wish." Martha could only nod, her throat too tight for words. She watched as he disappeared once more into the deepening dusk, his figure merging with the land like a shadow returning home. That night, as she lay awake, listening to the desert wind, she admitted something to herself she had not dared before. She wanted to see him again. Not out of gratitude, not even out of curiosity, but because something in him, something ancient, steady, and kind, had awakened a part of her she thought had long been buried. And though she tried to silence it, the truth rose anyway, whispering in the dark. She was not too old to feel this. Not too old to hope. The next morning, Martha sat on the veranda with her scarf wrapped lightly around her shoulders, waiting. She told herself she was only resting, only enjoying the early desert air. But her eyes kept drifting to the horizon, searching. When Dakota appeared, striding silently from the canyon path, her heart skipped in a way she hadn't felt in decades. He greeted her with a nod, his gaze warm, then seated himself beside her as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "You walk better today," he observed. "Yes," Martha admitted. "It's healing." She hesitated before adding, "Thanks to you." A faint smile touched his lips, subtle but unmistakable. They began to talk, not quickly, not with the hurried exchanges of strangers, but with the slow rhythm of people who sense they have time. Martha asked about his life, though she already knew better than to expect a full story. "I live near the mesa," he said. "I hunt, I grow, I walk, The land provides what I need. And you never left? She pressed gently. He shook his head. This is my place. My father taught me to honor it. My mother taught me to listen to it. Their parents before them did the same. I am the last who still remembers. There was no boast in his words, only quiet certainty. Martha lowered her gaze to her hands. I lived my life in one little town. I used to think it was enough. Family, work, routine. I raised children. I grew old. But sometimes... She hesitated, her throat tightening. Sometimes it feels like I blinked and all of it passed me by. Dakota's dark eyes rested on her, unflinching. You have lived, he said. You carry it in your face, your voice. That is not nothing. His words touched her more deeply than she expected. Most people her age spoke of years as though they were weights, aches, ailments, regrets. But in his voice, the years sounded like treasures, proof of endurance. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. The quiet was companionable, not empty. Do you never get lonely? Martha asked at last. Dakota's jaw tightened, and, for the first time, she saw the shadow of sorrow cross his features. Yes, he said simply. I walk alone, eat alone, sleep alone. The land speaks, but it does not answer. Her chest ached at his honesty. She thought of the long nights in her quiet house, the empty chair beside her bed, the meals eaten in silence. Loneliness, she realized, was the one language they both knew fluently. I used to think loneliness was just part of getting older, Martha confessed. Like gray hair or stiff joints, something you endure. He turned to her. Then, his gaze steady. It does not have to be endured. It can be shared. The words lingered in the air, heavy with possibility. Martha felt her pulse quicken, her hands trembling in her lap. She wanted to ask shared with whom, but she already knew the answer. Instead, she said softly, You make it sound so simple. It is, he replied. 2 hearts, one silence, her breath caught. She had never heard love, or the possibility of love, described that way. Not as passion or drama, but as the gentle easing of solitude. 2 silences, fitting together. They spoke until the sun rose high, until the heat sent them back into the shade. Dakota told her stories of the stars, of the way his people read their patterns like a book. Martha shared memories of teaching, of books she had loved, of children who had grown under her care, and in those exchanges, small, steady, unhurried, something uncurled inside her, something warm, alive, and terrifying. By the time he stood to leave, she knew the truth. She was no longer waiting for life to pass. She was beginning, without quite meaning to hope again. The night sky above the desert was unlike anything Martha had ever seen. Back home, city lights dulled the heavens. Here, stars stretched in endless rivers of silver, as if the entire universe had leaned closer just to be noticed. Dakota had invited her to walk with him that evening, after the tourists had retreated into the safety of the lodge. He moved easily in the moonlight, his long stride unhurried, his presence steady. Martha walked beside him, leaning lightly on the staff he had fashioned from a smooth branch, her ankle much improved, but still tender. They climbed to a low ridge overlooking the canyon. The air was cool, scented faintly with juniper. Martha drew her scarf tighter around her shoulders, though she suspected the shiver that ran through her wasn't from the cold. For a while, they stood in silence. Dakota gazed upward, his profile etched against the starlight, as if he belonged to another age entirely. Martha followed his gaze, letting the vastness wash over her. And yet, even with the heavens spread above her, her thoughts circled inward, to him to herself, to the fragile bridge forming between them. Finally, she broke the silence. "Dakota," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't understand why you spend this time with me. You could walk these mesas with anyone, someone younger, stronger." He did not look at her immediately. His gaze lingered on the stars before he asked, "Why should I seek another?" She gave a brittle laugh, meant to disguise the ache beneath her words. "Because I'm old. Too old for love, for beginnings. My life is mostly behind me. Surely you can see that." Her words hung in the cool air, heavier than she intended. She braced herself for his agreement, for the polite kindness, the inevitable withdrawal. It was the truth, after all, the truth she had carried like a shield for years. Better to admit it than to hope. But Dakota turned to her then, his dark, eyes unwavering. "Old?" he repeated softly, as though testing the word. "You are alive, breathing, walking, laughing." His gaze softened. "There is no old in that." Martha swallowed hard, but the words she had held inside for so long spilled out. "I was married once. I knew love, real love, and when it ended I thought, that was it. I told myself that years after would be for duty, for family, for quiet, not for passion, not for companionship. And now," she faltered, her throat thick, "now I'm invisible to the world. People look past me. No one sees me anymore." Her voice cracked on the last words. She had not meant to confess so much, yet in the stillness of the desert, in the presence of this man, her defenses crumbled. For a long moment, Dakota said nothing. The only sound was the wind moving softly over the canyon rim. Then he stepped closer, his towering frame casting her in shadow, but his voice was gentle, steady. "I see you," he said. The words struck her like a drumbeat, simple, unadorned, but filled with a depth that made her chest tighten. "You carry sorrow, yes," he continued, "but you also carry strength. You have lived, you have given, you have endured. That is not nothing, Martha. That is everything." She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering in the starlight. "But love doesn't come at this age. Not real love. Not the kind that lasts." He studied her for a long moment, and then, with a quiet certainty that left no room for doubt, he said, "Love does not measure years. It measures hearts." Martha felt her breath catch. The shield she had carried for so long, the armor of "I'm too old," cracked beneath the weight of his words. For the first time in decades, she felt possibility, terrifying, fragile, undeniable, blooming in her chest. And under the desert stars, she realized she could no longer hide behind excuses. She had spoken her fear aloud, and he had not turned away. The desert wind hushed around them, carrying the faint scent of sage and stone. Martha stood beneath the endless stars, her heart thudding like a drum she hadn't heard in years. She had said the words out loud, "I'm too old for love." They echoed in her ears, brittle, final, like a door closing. But Dakota did not let them stand. He moved closer, the earth seeming to bend to his stride. His shadow fell across her, but his presence was not heavy. It was steady, protective, like the shelter of a great tree. He lowered himself to one knee so that his eyes met hers directly. For a man so towering, the gesture held a gravity that made Martha's breath catch. "You believe love belongs to the young," he said softly. "You think it leaves when the skin changes, when the hair turns silver. But love is not a child's game. Love is the fire that waits beneath the ashes." Martha's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to insist she was being practical, realistic. Yet his gaze pinned her, dark, unwavering, unyielding. She felt seen, as if he looked not at her aging face, but into the marrow of who she was. "I've lived a long time alone," he continued, his voice carrying the weight of truth. "I watched others find their companions, build families, share their laughter. I walked these mesas year after year, listening to the land, listening to myself. But in my heart, I was waiting." Her lips parted. "Waiting for what?" His answer came without hesitation. "For you." The word struck her like a sudden storm. She almost laughed, almost wept. "For me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. His voice grew firmer, each word anchored like stone. "I know you are strong. I know you are kind. I know you have endured grief and kept walking. I know your spirit carries fire, even if you tell yourself it is gone. Do you think the land brought me to you by chance? No, I have waited my whole life for you." Tears blurred her vision, hot and unbidden. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trembling. No one had spoken to her like this in decades, not since Frank, her husband, had looked at her with that same unshakable devotion. She had thought such words belonged only to memory. "Dakota," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You can't mean—" But his hand, broad and warm, reached for hers. He held it with a gentleness that stunned her, as if her hand were the most delicate thing in the world. "I do mean it," he said. "Every step I have taken led to this moment. I am not a man who speaks lightly. I do not say words I cannot keep." The night seemed to pause around them, the stars holding their breath. Martha's heart pounded against her ribs, wild and young again. Still, fear rose inside her. "But what if I can't? What if I don't know how to begin again?" He squeezed her hand gently, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then we begin together, slow, steady, like the sun rising. There is no rush. There is only the truth, that you are not too old, and I am not too late." A sob escaped her, half laughter, half grief. She leaned forward without thinking, pressing her forehead lightly against his. The warmth of him, the steadiness of him washed over her. For the first time in so many years, she allowed herself to believe. To believe that love was not behind her, that love could arrive in the twilight of life as surely as in its dawn. Dakota's voice rumbled softly against her. "Do you feel it?" She closed her eyes, her tears slipping freely now. "Yes," she whispered. "God help me. Yes." And in that moment, beneath the watchful desert sky, Martha Ellis understood. She was not invisible. She was seen, chosen, cherished. And the man beside her had been waiting his whole life to tell her so. The desert dawn spilled across the canyon in streaks of gold and rose, painting cliffs and mesas with a soft, radiant light. Martha woke with the lingering warmth of Dakota's hand pressed in hers, the memory of his words echoing through her chest. For the first time in decades, she felt something more than contentment. She felt alive. She sat on the veranda, sipping her morning tea, and watched the sun stretch across the horizon. The shadows of the canyon shifted slowly, like slow breathing giants. And she realized the world felt different, not because it had changed, but because she had. Dakota joined her shortly after, carrying 2 mugs and a small woven blanket. He handed her a mug, his large hands brushing hers lightly. Martha felt a thrill in the contact, a grounding warmth that made her pulse quicken. "Good morning," he said, voice low and steady, as if the desert itself spoke through him. "Good morning," she replied, though her voice carried a lightness she hadn't known in years. She studied him, sitting tall and calm, every movement deliberate and unhurried. You make it seem possible," she said, almost shyly, "to live differently, even now." Dakota's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "It has always been possible," he said. "You only needed to see it." Martha's heart swelled. She had lived so long thinking she had reached the final chapters of her story, believing that passion, hope, and connection were no longer meant for her. Yet here, under the vast desert sky, she realized those chapters were only beginning. Day unfolded slowly, deliberately, as they walked the canyon rim together. Each step was unhurried. Each glance exchanged between them carried a depth that words could scarcely capture. Dakota spoke of the stars, of the paths they marked for. Travelers and dreamers alike, Martha told stories of her past, of books she had loved, of children she had nurtured, of losses she had survived, and as she spoke, she felt a weight lifting from her chest, the heavy resignation that had cloaked her for decades. In its place grew a light, vibrant, almost reckless. She laughed freely, sometimes unexpectedly, the sound ringing clear against the rock walls of the canyon. She realized she had forgotten what it felt like to be unguarded, to exist without walls. Dakota listened with quiet intensity, asking questions, offering insights, never interrupting, never imposing. His presence was a mirror, reflecting back to her not just her fears, but her strength, her vitality, her enduring capacity to love and be loved. As the sun dipped low and painted the cliffs in fiery hues, they paused at a secluded overlook. The canyon stretched endlessly before them, shadows and light dancing together. Martha looked at him, seeing for the first time not a legend, not a giant, but a man who had chosen her as she had begun to choose him. She breathed in the cool evening air, tasting possibility, tasting life renewed. "I never imagined," she whispered, her voice trembling with awe and wonder. "That you could feel this again?" Dakota asked softly, almost a question, almost a statement. "Yes," she admitted. "I thought it was too late. I thought life had moved on without me." He took her hand again, holding it as naturally as breathing. "Life does not abandon those who keep walking," he said. "It waits for the moment they are ready to see it." Martha's heart ached with a new kind of longing, not fear, not grief, but anticipation. She realized she was ready to step fully into this life, this love, this second chance. She could feel the ember in her chest kindling into a fire, steady and warm. The awakening was not sudden. It was not loud. It was a gentle, inevitable recognition that she was alive, desired, and fully seen, that the world could still astonish her. That love, in its truest form, was not bound by years or circumstance. And as the first stars began to prick the darkening sky, Martha leaned into Dakota's presence, letting herself finally surrender to the wonder of it all. The desert held them in its quiet embrace. Two hearts, no longer lonely, two souls unfolding together. The next morning, the desert greeted them with soft light spilling over the mesas. Martha rose early, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the steady presence of Dakota nearby. The world felt wide and full, as though every shadow had been chased away by the brilliance of possibility. For years, she had lived in measured routines, her heart tempered by grief and caution. But now, the steady rhythm of the desert, the breadth of the sky, and the strength of Dakota beside her made her feel limitless. She was not just a visitor in this landscape. She belonged. Dakota prepared breakfast over a small fire, his movements precise and calm. The aroma of coffee mingled with the scent of sage, grounding her in a sense of peace she had long forgotten. Martha watched him, marveling at the way his presence seemed to weave itself into the desert itself. Every motion, every glance carried a quiet authority, tempered by gentleness. "I never imagined mornings could feel like this," she admitted softly, taking her mug from him. He smiled, eyes glinting in the morning light. "It is not the morning," he said, "nor the place. It is what we bring to it. You bring your heart, and the world responds." Martha felt a flush of warmth. She had thought herself too old, too cautious, too late for anything resembling love. But in this place, in his company, she felt reborn. She took a deep breath, savoring the crisp desert air, the scent of earth and fire, and the quiet certainty of companionship. After breakfast, they set out to walk the canyon rim. The wind teased her hair and tugged at her scarf, but she did not mind. With every step, she felt her fears melt further, replaced by courage, the courage to embrace life fully, without reservation. As they reached a high overlook, the canyon stretched endlessly beneath them, bathed in golden light. Martha turned to Dakota, her heart swelling with emotion. "I never thought I'd start over. At my age, I thought everything had ended." He took her hand in both of his grasp firm and comforting. "Nothing truly ends. Some chapters pause, yes, but life always continues. And sometimes it surprises us when we least expect it." She smiled, tears brimming, feeling a weight lift from her chest. The loneliness she had carried for decades seemed to vanish in that single, profound moment. She no longer feared the passage of time. Instead, she embraced it, knowing it had led her here, to this man, to this place, to a love she had almost given up on. They stayed on the overlook long after the sun climbed high, speaking little, content, in the quiet intimacy of shared presence. Words were unnecessary. The canyon, the wind, the sky, and their hearts spoke for them. In the days that followed, Martha settled into a rhythm she had never imagined possible. She and Dakota walked the desert together, sharing stories, tending the land, and discovering the simple joys of each other's company. Every sunrise felt like a promise. Every evening carried the comfort of belonging. When her sister returned home, Martha bid her farewell with a confidence she had never known. "I'll be here for a while," she said with a smile. "Some things are worth staying for." The desert had become their sanctuary, a place where the past could rest peacefully, and the future could be embraced with open arms. Martha learned that love did not adhere to age, that life's second chances were real, and that hearts, no matter how long they had waited, could still find one another. As the first light of a new day painted the cliffs in fiery gold and soft, Rose, Martha, and Dakota stood hand in hand, looking out over the vast landscape. The desert wind stirred their clothes and hair, carrying a quiet promise of eternity. For Martha, this was more than a new chapter. It was a new dawn. A life lived fully, fiercely, and freely. A love that had waited patiently for its time. And beside her, the man who had claimed her heart with a truth as enduring as the mesas themselves. Together, they stepped forward, leaving behind fear, loneliness, and doubt, and embracing the brilliance of a love that knew no bounds. The desert held them in its timeless embrace, and for the first time in many years, Martha Ellis felt completely, irrevocably alive.